And you've got a bit of an interesting story yourself, man, because you're a lawyer.
Yeah. Do you know what's funny? I was preparing myself for having this conversation. I was thinking about who I started with. I went through law school in Wellington. I started at Balgully and I started with Connor Archbold.
Yeah.
I was flatting with Brooke Roberts, who started Sharesies, and a guy called Josh Daniel, who's the CEO of Akahu.
Yeah.
And it's kind of interesting. I saw Brooke today and I saw Josh yesterday at the Fintech Hui. There are a lot of people that are doing some amazing things that have come from like quite corporate sort of backgrounds. And I was sort of thinking about why that is. It's not...
What advice would you give to people out there at the moment, like for startups and for people thinking about sales? Because this is a question we get asked on the podcast all the time.
Yeah.
When do we hire a salesperson? What should we do?
Yeah, I think it's really, really interesting. I think...
So if you were in Andrew's position right now and you had a team around you that you were looking to mentor, like what key things would you get them to think about straight away?
One is kind of enthusiasm, excitement vibe. Like, do they have like something that
they want it?
Yeah, do they want it? And like, are you feeling that through the first Zoom call that you're having? You know, are you actually feeling that someone's engaged and interested? And then I think the second piece that I love is like...
Welcome to the Startup Theatre Podcast with your host, Troy Hammond. This podcast is produced by Empire Films.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Startup Theatre Podcast, episode 2. And on this podcast, we are so lucky to be joined by our co-host, Adrien Muir. Adrien, welcome to the podcast.
Oh, thanks, Troy. How are you?
Yeah, I'm awesome. Look, it was always our plan to get you on the podcast. Obviously, we've been chatting about co-hosts, and we said that Serge is going to have some time off here and there, so we'll bring you onto the podcast. And if we've got a guest that's only online, then we'll get you both on the podcast.
Is it the narrative we're playing? I thought you guys had just had a fight, a bit of a breakup.
Well,
romance is over.
Serge
Adrien.
Serge wore shorts on the last episode.
Move.
Yeah, bad feedback. So I think he's off
Was it his
getting
legs?
some implants in his calves or something like that, just to help him.
He's probably gone for a good couple of weeks biking to work on the calves.
That may be it. I heard something about biking. I wasn't sure if it was surgery or if it was biking. You can't believe whatever that guy says.
Oh, well, I'm happy to be here, keeping the couch warm for him. That's all good.
It's awesome to have you on.
Thanks.
And obviously that you've been in the startup ecosystem here in New Zealand, and you've officially moved to Wellington.
I know. I was thinking about this because I think last time we spoke, I was like waxing lyrical about you can't beat Wellington on a good day, and you were finding me friends in Queenstown. You were very kind, and you
and you were telling me how great Queenstown was.
Oh, God, Queenstown's the best place.
Actually, you and Ryan from Timely were both like, oh my God, Jack's Point in Queenstown's so awesome. You've both left.
I mean,
Ryan's gone back to Dunedin.
Do you know why? Because of kids, right? And I think the reality is Ryan's kept his house in Queenstown. I haven't done that. I met Ryan actually through you, but also our boys were at school together and were best mates. So it's
classic.
so great. Like, Queenstown's incredible. But I think when it gets to the point where at one point, I think I was going to have my daughter at boarding school in Christchurch. My husband was a COO working out of Sydney. I was in Wellington. And my son was in Queenstown, and I thought, I didn't come back from London to do that. And actually, as I pointed out last time, I am a Wellingtonian, so this made a lot of sense for us. My daughter had started at college recently, so we've moved in January. So I'm fresh back into living here, which is fantastic. But I have been working alongside Serge for a long time, just with the startup ecosystem we've got here as well, helping founders.
Getting some female voices into that little echo chamber there too.
I don't know if anyone saw somebody, I think Serge took one of his classic selfies the other day, and someone said to me, are you the only girl there? That was myself and Natalie from Powersuit, and we were like, whoop, there are a lot of women out there, and we're just got to get better at making sure that we're showcasing them.
I spend a lot of time trying to get female founders on the podcast, but I find it challenging. I'm not going to lie. Guys, do you not
like talking to girls, Troy?
Guys, I see you as podcast guests. You don't need to keep emailing me. There's a list of 1,000 of you. If something's topical or if I think, I'll definitely reach out and chat. Like female founders, I don't know what it is, and I'd be curious to talk to you about this because I'm really trying to showcase every founder out there possible and trying to encourage more women to get into technology by showcasing female founders, but I struggle to get them on the podcast.
It's disappointing. It's not massively surprising. I think that I'm possibly at a time in my life where I don't really care, so I'll come on into a podcast and chat away, and I'm not trying to prove myself necessarily, but I do think that, I think there are reasons. We talk about imposter syndrome, we talk about the tech bro stuff that was just happening. It can be quite intimidating. And
I wonder if it's my approach as well, whether I could look at how I'm approaching people.
Yeah, maybe I'll approach them for you.
Good idea.
All jokes aside, I remember where you and I spoke about coming onto the podcast. I'd done a few podcasts in the UK, but I hadn't really thought about, because you've been quite vulnerable. And you are talking about yourself, and actually women can be our worst critics, right? We are not the ones saying, oh yeah, I'll give it a go. I mean, that's not true, because founders tend to do that, but I remember thinking this is going to be incredibly nerve-wracking, and I'm not sure how much I'm willing to share, but I think it's a snapshot in time. It's a great opportunity to talk about your journey and what you're doing. I do think actually you've got to the point now that we can probably talk about a lot more of like where they've come from, because you've had some incredible guests, not just myself. We could probably do a little segment on that.
I'm excited about getting guests back on for episode 2 and just seeing where it's gone, because some guests have closed down startups, some guests have gone on to be successful, massively successful founders, and so I think and as you say, it's a snapshot in time, and I think it's a practiced art too, talking on camera and just talking to people. And I think the more you do it, the better you get. You're
lucky because you've got the likes of Jono, who makes you feel I remember feeling incredibly comfortable. And I do think there's a lot to be said about maybe giving everyone an opportunity to I sort of joked the other day with you about having a little bit of, startup theatre, rehearsals, where we can kind of give a little bit of media training, because it is something it's a great way to get your message out. It's a great way for you to put it on your LinkedIn. You can talk about it. And I do think also you've got a really captive audience and a really supportive bunch of people listening to this podcast who are genuinely interested in the story. So, you've done well to this point. I think for a long time you had, was it girl, guy? You did it really, And then, I'm not saying the well sort of dried up, but actually we're speaking to Jody from Addition, right? When we spoke to her recently, I think it was yesterday on the lead up to this, around about 50 women have put their hands up for that. So that's 50 female founders in New Zealand that we haven't even scratched the surface on, or you certainly haven't anyway. So
maybe this is your moment right now to talk to camera here to any female founders that are out there, and what is it about, in a podcast in particular, or what is it, for me, because I'm saying what I'm trying to offer is anyone's voice, anyone's story. If you're at the start of your story, the middle of your story, the end of your story, we want to hear it, and we want to encourage more people to go into startups. And, a lot of people ask me why we called this podcast Startup Theatre, right? And it was because there is a lot of things that happen in the startup world, right? And there's the bad connotations of startup theatre. There's a lot of people out there in government and doing this to jazz handsing to get into startups. But then there's also a lot of people that do really cool things to support startups and the theatre of it and helping and supporting them without looking for any money in return.
Totally. And that's what we're doing, even just within the Wellington startup community, and we're taking time out of our diaries to do that, and we all sit down. One of the great pieces of what we do that we just don't give advice, so we listen and we tell stories, and we've had some incredible companies turn up, and I just get so much from that, hearing about what is happening just in our own technology ecosystem. We've got people that fly down from Auckland because they also want to help, and they want to be involved in that process. And I love the fact that that's a big part of what being back for me in New Zealand is about, because I think we're all really keen to see New Zealand businesses be successful. I spent years and years in quite a male-dominated industry, and I have been supported by both men and women through that journey. But I've had some really successful opportunities to work in sort of women's groups and be part of that, and I find myself probably drawn towards making sure that if there is, for example, a female founder, we're making sure that she's sort of front and centre of that room as well, or we're wanting to make sure that we are showcasing her story, because we do know that they are, I think the percentage-wise in terms of money that's being given to them in terms of founders is low. To my female founders, like a Whitney Houston moment, I'm really keen for us to get you on. It doesn't have to be, I think we've had ones in the past where they're an hour long, or, I think that it would be a great opportunity. We can Zoom you in, so you can be in the comfort of your own home. We can talk to you beforehand and make sure you feel really comfortable. But this is an incredible opportunity that Troy and the team are going to be able to give everybody, and I'd like to see more. If you feel like you're not ready, no one's ready. Speaking from a female perspective, I think that I didn't feel ready when I came and talked, but this is a great opportunity, and it's a great, we talk about New Zealand being a great test bed, and this is a really good opportunity because it's incredibly comfortable. So reach out to me directly if you just want to, is Troy nice? Is Serge hard work? Is Jono awful? I'll give you the truth, right? I think it's a really nice opportunity. So more women founders, flying the flag for female founders. That is what I want to do.
I think that's fantastic, and you realise
you have to too.
100%. I'm with you. I think for me, and that's why I worked so hard on the first podcast, like the WFSL podcast, was really important for me as a father of a daughter who I want to be able to do anything in the world, to see people that because she's entrepreneurial, she's creative, and I know she's going to do something like that. So I wanted for her to see people that she could look up to, that she says to herself, oh yeah, I can do that. I could do that. I could do that.
And that's the point. I mean, I didn't have anyone to really look up to through that process, and I was never your A grade student or anything along those lines, and I didn't even know what I was going to do when I left school. And only recently, a couple of weeks ago, I went back and spoke at my own college at the Excellence Awards for the year of 13 and 12.
That's pretty cool.
It was very cool going back there. Of course, I never got an Excellence Award. I was up the back thinking about how I was going to nip out for a Winfield Red or a Brocklands.
I could smell excellence.
I wore my excellence on the inside, Troy. But I think
PS Team Winnie Blues here.
That's right. Right, yeah, exactly. Team Paul Mall. My point was I celebrated those kids. There were some amazing girls and amazing achievements. But I don't think that excellence is just about the academic side of stuff. And what I love about startups, which I've been a part of forever, and actually Fintech forever, is that you get this opportunity to be involved in as much or as little as you want. And when I went to London, they were talking, they were like, geez, man, is there anything she doesn't want to do? Like, I was annoying. I know I was annoying, but I got involved in as much as I could. And there is a beauty of the curiosity that we actually put into our kids. And Molly will be the same, and my daughter Alex is the same, and our sons are probably the same as well. They are going to be naturally curious. So we want to change a little bit of the thinking around these incredible tech companies, particularly in New Zealand and the ones that are going to be sort of scaling globally, and start saying there are jobs that are not just software developers, guys. I want really good technical account managers. I want to have great support people. I want people with brains that are thinking about product. I want to make sure that we've got the good marketing people on board. Like oh my God, I hate doing LinkedIn, and I hate thinking about cool things to do. But you've got these young kids that are going to be the ones that are going to solve these problems. So I think that one of the things we want to do also with supporting these founders is making sure that, we've got you here, of course, thinking about how we help build their teams and build their brand and help support them in that process. And
that's my favourite thing about AI is, to be honest, it's democratizing who can be a founder now, because you don't need to be super technical. You don't need to do this. You don't need to do that. And I think there's so many tools now that are out there that if you have an idea, do it.
Yeah.
Get it out there,
right?
right?
And also, I know it can be a lonely space. I get it. Like, I know that even being a CEO is a really lonely space, and being a founder and being a female founder, you're not rocking up to the school run and you've got 25 female founders. And trust me, I got my daughter's netball uniform sponsored last year, and I chose in Queenstown to find female founders, and I found them, and they are awesome, but it took me a while.
Some good ones down there.
And there's some good ones out there, right? And they're the ones that are just flying the flag for the girls, and they want to see their brand on these kids, on their hoodies and stuff. So, look, I would love to see more if you can. I know that's, Serge would as well, and it speak for him. It'd be really a good opportunity for us, particularly on the startup theatre.
Yeah, well, that's a good segue, because we're about to go into our news section, which is Caffeine comes on. We have Finn from Caffeine. He's our startup correspondent that's sort of finger on the pulse with what's happening in the news. And he's got a special story of something that, Jody, that we mentioned before. And so let's cut to Finn.
Kia ora, pleasure to be back.
Week 2, mate. We've had some amazing feedback on your dulcet tones on the podcast from last week, and I just ask you kindly to please just tone it down a little bit and try not to make us look so bad.
Look, well, it's all downhill from here, mate. I saved all my A+ material for the first step, and so don't worry. It's just going to be a car crash from here on out, I promise.
Well, that's welcome to the show, mate. Well, what's happening in startup news this week, mate?
Well, we've actually got some great startup news to kick off with, because we love it when we see a major acquisition sort of at this early part of the year. So Quantify Photonics has been acquired by Teradyne Systems, and we don't know exactly how much for, but in the release from Punakaiki Fund, which was the lead investor on the ground locally, second largest investor behind Intel, they say they're waiting for OIO approval, which obviously implies that we're sort of north of that $100 million mark. So that's going to see some pretty impressive amount of money flow back into the ecosystem. And also Photonics is just one of those industries that is a bit undersung in New Zealand, but we're talking well over $1 billion, and that's based on 2020 numbers. So I imagine that's going to be much higher from today. And if people like me, when they first heard this, weren't as familiar with photonics, it's essentially the industrial applications of light. So think fiber optics, anything that's moving massive amounts of data. So this is obviously an adjacent industry to the booming data sector center. So anything in the AI boom is going to require photonics, because you're moving incredible amounts of data incredibly quickly. A lot of the equipment they design is around testing and sort of streamlining the systems and data centers, which will allow them to draw down a little bit less power, as obviously we're going to be building more and more and more of these things. And so hopefully address some of that environmental impact and just get the systems working better. So it's great news. We love to see it, but hopefully it's one of many that we'll see throughout the year.
Yeah, and I have got to say, like, Adrien, we just love it when an acquisition happens in New Zealand. It's so great. And especially, it's been a tough year for a lot of startups.
Agreed. This is great news.
This is really great news. So Photonics, well done. Congratulations. What else is happening, mate?
Well, I thought one of the themes for the last couple of weeks has been a bit of a roller coaster for Rocket Lab. So people might be familiar, a couple of weeks back, there's a really influential publication called the Bleecker Street Report coming out of the States, which wrote a post implying, well, pretty much flat out saying, not attributing to anyone from Rocket Lab, but saying that they had sources saying the Neutron rocket, a much lauded rocket launch for Rocket Lab, which will be their reusable rocket, allowing them to more directly compete with SpaceX, that rocket was going to be delayed. That sent ripples through the share market. We saw quite a sharp dip on Rocket Lab shares, but they've really come back swinging. They had their earnings call about a week and a half after that, unveiled some record earnings, delivered a really clear timeline of when exactly that rocket launch was going to happen. And they also unveiled a whole bunch of new stuff surrounding that, including like an ocean platform that their rockets can land on, allowing them to do even more launches. And so it's really great to see that from Rocket Lab, because I think a lot of people might not realize quite what a major player we are in this space. We are third in the world in terms of overall rocket launches. It's the US, China, and then New Zealand, which is astonishing considering the scale of this industry. And hopefully we're going to see a lot more of this. And Rocket Lab's unveiled a multi-year deal with a Japanese satellite company to get more of their satellites into orbit. They've got one happening in the next week or so. And it's just got the coolest name I've ever heard. The Lightning God Reigns is the name of the launch. And I'm like, I don't get to work on anything with that cool of a job title. Like, my job titles are like media, external release, today's date. I want to work on the Lightning God Reigns.
Oh, I tell you what, as a recruiter, anytime I can work on something that has a really cool job title, just excites me a little bit more. But that's just next level. Is that what you're going to call yourself now, Adrien?
It'll be something like that, Lightning God. I can roll with that for sure. It is actually really good to see these guys, as you say, just saying, hang on a second, I heard that, but let me actually give you the real story, like owning the whole narrative and moving forward. That's full credit, man.
I think it's time for Peter Beck to take that spotlight shine. You know, Elon's wavering a little bit, you know, and so... Come
on, Peter.
Yeah, he doesn't seem to...
This is a wide open lane. Can we just have someone working in space that the entire world isn't turning against? Yeah, you've got a PR spot to fill there, Peter.
Yeah, I've got two arms that I'll just guide him in and clamp down on...
But it's also one of quite a few cool space stories that are happening at the moment. On SpaceX, you know, as much as the Musk of it all can interfere, there is some incredible work happening there. And we've seen a bunch of launches over the past couple of months, including some really interesting commercial applications in space. So people might remember that the next big project from China and the US is to build a permanent base on the moon. The Artemis project in 2026 wants to return people to the moon. We haven't been back to the moon since 1972. And so that's incredible to think of an actual lunar base being built in the next few years, or at least starting to be built. But there were two stories that came out of this, which I did find kind of funny. There's a lot of tragic stories that come out of space in terms of machinery. Remember the Discovery rover in 2019, which died on Mars, and its last report back was, "My battery is getting low, it's getting dark," and that was the last thing anyone heard. And I was like, it really tugs on your heartstrings for the rover. We had another couple of those where Athena from Intuitive Machines was on the latest SpaceX rocket, and it was a probe that was heading to the moon to try and mine for ice, because obviously finding ice on the moon, well, we know ice is there, but getting access to it would be huge when you're trying to build these lunar bases. And the lander got there, made it all the way to the moon, landed, and then fell over, and the solar panel wasn't facing the right way, so then it died. And imagine just sitting there watching that happen, being like, "Guys, hard part's over, rockets up, we're in space, awesome. Oh, we've made it to the surface of the moon, everything's going great," and at the last second, boom. So no matter how tough your startup day is, just at least you're not those guys right now. So heart goes out to them. And the other one I wanted to touch on was Astroforge, who are doing some really cool stuff. They were on the same rocket. They're looking to commercialize asteroid mining. Neil deGrasse Tyson, astrophysicist, has long said the first trillionaire on Earth will be the founder who figures out how to mine an asteroid, and they are really gunning for that. So they sent out a probe to get the closest asteroid to us. Unfortunately, they have lost contact with it, but I just wanted to shout them out because we love seeing people take massive swings.
Yeah, it's awesome. And Dawn Aerospace down in Christchurch is also doing some really cool stuff. I think we've got them coming on the podcast in a few weeks to talk about something super exciting as well. So like, how awesome is it that all these the space race, and we've got two of these companies from New Zealand. Hopefully we can get something on the moon in New Zealand that stays upright with the solar panel shining down and battery supporting it. Yeah, that's cool stuff. I mean, it's bloody exciting. I think. Well, can I just ask you, Adrien and Finn, would you go to Mars? Like, so with the moon base is like the first step of like setting up for a Mars trip. Would you go to Mars, both of you?
Oh, good question. I think I probably would give it an opportunity to understand a bit more about it, but I don't know. I don't know if I'm a bit risk averse.
You, Finn?
I definitely wouldn't be the first person to go to Mars. I might be the 10th, but I think I definitely wouldn't be signing up to be the test subject for it. I don't know. I do think it would be almost by definition one of the most incredible experience you could have in your life, right? But it seems like people go two ways. Some people go to space. Astronauts often talk about it, of having this profound psychological experience of looking back at Earth and understanding this vulnerable globe that we're sitting on and how tiny and insignificant we are in space. And some people have this incredible sense of love and wonder, but also some people go and just get incredibly depressed. Remember, William Shatner went to space, Captain Kirk, and it was this amazing PR opportunity. And when he got back, he had to admit that it was the most depressing experience of his life. And he said, "I went there thinking I was going to experience the sense of wonder, but I looked back and thought, oh my God, we're so tiny, it's so dark out there, we're so alone, and we keep screwing things up." So I don't know, it could be psychologically challenging, but if Musk is listening to this, please hit me up, because I probably would go if you offered.
Yeah, no, indeed. What else is happening?
What else? Well, as we were talking about just before we started recording, there's another really cool startup story that came around the back of International Women's Day. And obviously there's a lot of fluffery often with this. When anyone who spends any time on LinkedIn will just see brands try and attach themselves to International Women's Day without actually really following through and taking some substantive action. So it's really cool to see Edition Studios from Auckland actually put their money where their mouth is. And they're offering a $15,000 scholarship for a female founder who sends in their idea to Edition, and who the applicant that gets chosen is going to get some real wraparound support to take their idea from that concept stage through to actually starting to be able to build their business. And because that's that threshold that people need to cross, right? And that's where that support needs to be injected. So it's really great to see, but I don't want to rattle on about that too much, because the irony of just two dudes talking about that while not actually talking to Edition about it is a little bit too challenging for me.
Well, 100%. And like Adrien and I were actually chatting about this topic before you joined us, Finn. I think it's a really important topic to talk about. And so that's why we actually wanted to get Jody Kennedy from Edition to come on the podcast. And so we're lucky enough to be joined by Jody now, Finn. So please welcome Jody. Hey, Jody, super excited to get you on the podcast. Thank you so much for joining.
Thanks for having me.
So, Jody, tell us a little bit about what's happening at the moment.
In regards to the grant, we have had, just before this call, we checked roughly close to 70 applicants of women founders, which is really awesome.
That is really cool.
So you're saying 70 in the last how many? In a couple of weeks, couple of days?
2 days, yeah.
Right. That's pretty phenomenal. Sitting here as a
it's pretty
previous
awesome.
sort of founder and a female, and I think that's pretty exciting. Tell us a little bit about why you guys got to that point, and what were you thinking when you were like, hang on a second, we can do something about this?
So roughly 5 years ago, Scott and I, we started a design and technology studio called Addition, which you guys introed. And so we help tech companies with software design, software development, websites, branding, and our clients are companies kind of anywhere on the journey from early stage startup company building an MVP right through to the Camis who have a global business valued at 100 million plus. And throughout the 5 years, we kind of often joked that there were a lot of Daves and Bens and Chris's that we worked with. There's a few names. And then so it wasn't until we actually decided to sit down and look and see how many, and we realized that in the 5 years that we've been in business, we've had more founders named Dave than we have women founders, which is insane. It's not that we don't love our Daves and our Bens and our Chris's. It's just that, we love all our clients, but we'd love to see more women come through the door. And there's a really great report from Jenny Russ and Teresa Gadding, and it's called The Gender Investment Gap. And I urge everyone to have a look into the report. It's really awesome. But it highlights that 7 out of every 100 startups that receive investment in New Zealand are founded by women. So if you look at that, it's no surprise that when we look at the companies that we've worked with, so many of them are founded by men over women. And I think in general, it'd be great to see more diversity in the sector. New Zealand tech is full of incredible ideas and innovation, and I'm so proud to work in the space, but I truly believe it will only get better with more diversity. And it's not to say that this grant is that we think it's going to change the entire system. We can't do that, but would love to see more people contribute to this change that we'd love to see in New Zealand.
Yeah, I mean, I massively applaud this, Jody, and I think that it's exceptional that you're here today talking to us about this, because we joke about the fact that there were Daves, and to your point, those Daves are pretty amazing. Back in the UK, when in 2015, the same thing happened when they realised that there were more Johns in CEO and board roles on the FTSE 100 than there were women, and that became a real talking point, which changed a lot of regulation around getting more women on boards and getting more women involved in more executive management positions, because you've got to have that discussion. And so I think that what you're doing, although you're probably thinking, okay, we'd just love to help out, I really applaud this, and I think if we can do more to sort of help support these female founders, and you've got 70, and I want to know who they are. I think it's amazing. All power to you, and I just think this is fantastic.
Look, it's not often that people put their money where their mouth is and do something about it. And so, hats off to you guys. It's been phenomenal to see this playing out over the last couple of days. What if some female founders are watching this now and they think, oh my God, I want to sign up to this, what should they do?
Yeah, cool. I think you can go to our website, additiongroup.com, or flick us an email, hello@additiongroup.com. Just talk to us about your idea, about where you're at in the company's lifespan. Tell us why you think you'd be a great recipient for the funding. And then at the end of the month, we will choose a lucky winner.
I guess the last question I have for you, Jody, is how long have people got to apply for this grant?
Entries are open until the 8th of April, and then so from the 8th of April we'll go away and find a lucky recipient.
Awesome. Well, we've got that link on screen now. Jono is magically putting it above my hand somewhere so that you can go and check out that link, and we'll have it down in the show notes. Awesome.
Jody, I love this, and it would be great if at some stage Troy can get you back on for a bit of an update on how is it going and what you're finding from that, because I think we should all get behind that, and actually if we can just even link some of these in our notes if we can. But I think it's great. I really appreciate you chatting.
Yeah. Hey, thanks so much for coming on, and all the best with everything that's ahead. I think that's a really great initiative.
Thanks, Jody.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Actually, Adrien, do you mind if I just stop you for a quick segment brought to you by Talent Army? Thank you. So last week we talked on the podcast about some different segments that we wanted to do and try some things. But one that I'm really passionate about is spotlighting startups. We, Talent Army, work in the industry helping to support these early stage startups. And so I wanted to shout out some of you and put you under the spotlight and share our audience, like to share the products with our audience. And so we went through the list of startups that have sort of emailed in, and we've chosen a couple or three today that we're going to talk you through. And pertinently, like last week on the podcast, we were talking a lot about culture. And I found this cool SaaS product called Amplify. We talked about how tough it can be to really build culture of innovation. And that's where this Amplify product comes in. It's all about helping teams to develop the right habits, like better communication and creative thinking, so that innovation just becomes part of the way you work. Check them out at amplify.guru. Next up, we've got Decentrica. And so we all know how managing software can feel like a real nightmare, especially with all the end of life and support deadlines. Decentrica is changing that with Metaport. It helps teams to stay on top of software risks without the usual hassle. Plus, they're actually shaking up the pricing model to make software more accessible for everyone. We love this, and so it's definitely worth checking them out at decentrica.com. And lastly, under the spotlight, we have Step Forward. Wellington founders Kate and Stephen are all about helping teams grow and thrive. They focus on leadership, coaching, sales, and making meetings actually productive. Plus, their platform, Puawai, brings your strategy to life. No more dusty plans. It's all about real-time collaboration, whether you're in a meeting or whether you're on the shop floor. So go and check them out at stepforward.co.nz. I hope these products really enjoy the spotlight this week. And I really appreciate that all these founders are out there grinding, and everyone that sent in their emails. We'll try and get through as many as we can. And so send them into the podcast, and hopefully we can feature you on Startups in the Spotlight next week. Today's guest is brought to you by Vanta. Whether you're starting or scaling your company's security program, demonstrating top-notch security practices and establishing trust is more important than ever. Vanta automates compliance for global frameworks like ISO 27001 and SOC 2, saving you time and money, helping you build customer trust. Over 8,000 global companies like Atlassian, Dovetail, Sharesies and Flossy all use Vanta to manage risk and prove security in real time. I actually had dinner with the whole Vanta team, and I knew instantly that they would be the sponsor on the podcast. They just genuinely care about startups. And to make it go even one better, they've actually decided that my audience gets a special offer of $1,000 USD off from Vanta. All you have to do is go to vanta.com/startup theatre and enjoy your $1,000 USD off now. Yeah, so as Adrien and I said, we're lucky enough today to be joined by Lowry Gladwell from Airwallex. Lowry, thanks so much for coming on the podcast,
Thank you for having me. It's awesome to be here.
Yeah, it's awesome to get in Auckland and fly to Wellington too for a podcast.
Indeed. I'm committed.
Are you staying the night though?
I'm not. I'm flying back this evening. Weather dependent though.
Yeah, well, you're definitely not flying home. We'll book dinner.
This is what happens now when you're the biggest podcast in the center of the world. People fly in and fly out just to come and see your podcast.
Global.
Normally we get Aucklanders that say, look, no, you're going to have to come up here, mate, and shoot.
Yeah.
But we're too big for that now, obviously, as you know.
I'll come down every time.
Yeah, cheers, mate.
Do you get down to Wellington much?
I haven't recently, but this was a good excuse. I'm sort of stationed out of Creative HQ, which is cool, but maybe 6 months ago. Actually, over Christmas, I was over in the Wairarapa in Greytown.
Good spot. I lived over there for a long time.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So nice.
You guys have been in the news recently, like at events and conferences.
Yeah.
And I remember the first time I'd heard of you guys. Someone turned around and they were like, "Troy, what are they doing?" I was like, "I have no idea." And so, in your words, tell us what do you guys do?
I would say it's a global financial services platform or a global financial platform. The way that I imagine it in my head, it's like if a bank was built today and it was built globally, how would it work? And we sort of have these national banks that are, set up based on national regulation or domestic regulation. But if you were to start again and if you were to build, a financial services company, it would be built like this. So easy to make cross-border payments. You can get paid by people all over the world, like with absolute ease, which is just as simple as someone paying you in New Zealand. And you can make payouts all over the world. We're not a bank, so we don't call it a bank. But
B2B though, right? Just B2B.
Just B2B, but I sort of think about it as a global financial services platform, receiving payments, holding funds, and making payments. which is kind of the three columns. So
Yeah.
bringing money in, getting paid, holding money, getting that money back into New Zealand dollars, and then making payments out to suppliers, your employees, if you have expenses, etc.
Out of Melbourne, my hometown.
Yeah.
I love it when a startup comes out of Melbourne.
Yeah.
It comes out stronger, I reckon.
Yeah.
Just like
There you
Melbourne
go.
hardens you. Did the founders like see what happened with Silicon Valley Bank and go, we could make that better?
I think the story goes they started a cafe, or they were setting up a cafe, and the problem was that they were buying coffee cups. This is what I read, or someone was telling me this. They were buying coffee cups and they're buying them in China, and they couldn't figure out how to make a payment from an Aussie bank to a Chinese supplier. They couldn't do it. And so they realized that that was the problem. And that fundamentally is kind of where Airwallex came from, which is how do you easily pay people overseas without having to go through the kind of huge effort that you would have to do an international bank transfer through one of the big banks.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the genesis of the product. And it has built from there. It's got bigger, and it sort of started with global accounts and multi-currency money movement, and it's expanded so it now sort of sits collecting payments. It sort of has a online checkout and a way of collecting payments. That money kind of comes into a wallet, we call it, and then we have ways to pay. So we've got cards and we've got bill pay and we've got various other things that enable businesses to be able to effectively make payments really easily. So it's those three things, but it sort of started with the founders realizing that actually it was very, very difficult for an Aussie company to make a payment to a Chinese supplier.
I love startups.
Yeah.
I love the real origin stories of
Yeah.
startups
Yeah.
before they become too big that everything changes.
Yeah.
And they're like, well, I saw a niche in the global market, and I sat around in my garage for 10 months trying to figure out how to solve it.
Yeah.
I think that's a cool story.
Yeah.
And you've got a bit of an interesting story yourself, man, because like you sort of you sort of started in the sort of payments world with ASB when I think I'd first heard of you. I was chatting with Dan Buchanan the other day, and he was like, I remember from ASB.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then joined my old mob in Vend, who became Lightspeed. But you were a lawyer.
Yeah.
And so curious to chat to you about that, just because I don't know what it is, but over the last 10 years, is it just lawyers are so burnt out now that they've all just wanted to be startup junkies? Or
Do you know what's funny? I was having a look. I was sort of preparing myself for having this conversation. I was thinking about who I started with. So I went through law school in Wellington. I started at Balgully, and I started with Connor Archbold. I was flatting with Brooke Roberts, who started Sharesies, and a guy called Josh Daniel, who's the CEO of Akahu. And it's kind of interesting. I saw Josh and I saw Brooke today, and I saw Josh yesterday at the Fintech Hui. There are a lot of people that are doing some amazing things that have come from like quite sort of, corporate sort of backgrounds. And I was sort of thinking about why that is, and like particularly with fintech. And I think when you sit in those roles, you can often see, like particularly with things like AML, like First AML and companies like that, where you can really, really see these problems that exist that need to be solved, but actually no one but well, maybe this is an overstatement, but no one but a lawyer or someone like sitting very deeply in that problem can actually see how big it is, and then see the answer or see the way that you can solve that problem. So I think RegTech in particular is really interesting for like lawyers or accountants to come into and kind of like figure out how they can solve it. I did kind of corporate law, and I started during the GFC, and kind of all the finance companies were kind of falling over in New Zealand. And that was kind of fascinating. Law was very, the reason I sort of moved out of law is I was sitting there with, it was actually Vend, and I was sitting there with the BD folks. You might have worked with them. I was sitting with a couple of BD folks.
Who was it?
It was PE. Do you remember PE? So I was sitting with PE, and there was a guy called Chris Connolly who came through from, I think it was Wind Cave, and I was sitting there with those two, and I was like, man, they're doing some really interesting stuff. And I was sitting there as the lawyer working on these deals that they were doing, and Vend was going through, like, doing some amazing, reseller agreements over in the States, and they were signing up like amazing integration partners. Like, we were having discussions with Facebook at the time.
Yeah.
And I remember sitting there and just being like, I was sort of on the sidelines, and I couldn't I realized that I wanted to be in the middle of it. I wanted to be in those conversations. I didn't just want to be the support person on the side drafting the contract. There's a person who I was reporting into, Anna White, who's the Chief Strategy Officer of Lightspeed now. And she was just fantastic. And I basically lobbied her for like a good year to give me like a chance to go in and do BD and partnerships.
Because you joined as the in-house legal counsel.
I joined as the second lawyer. And
How do you lobby from being a lawyer to a salesperson?
It was really hard. And like I thought it would be a bit easier, but like trying to convince someone that actually your skill set is better suited to go into BD and like partnerships.
How do you do that? I've been chasing ambulances for years. I can chase deals.
Yeah, totally. Well, I don't know. I eventually convinced them. It took ages, but I eventually convinced them. And Anna was like, if you want to do this and you want to do it properly, go up to Toronto. We've got an office up in Toronto. Yeah. That's where all of the
deals there.
Yeah, Butch was leading it at the time. And Butch sort of took me under his wing, and like that's how I kind of got the opportunity to do it. But it was a massive punt that Vend took on me, and I look back at that, and I'm like, God, I'm so thankful that they actually took that punt, because it's quite an unnatural sort of shift in some ways to go from
maybe I'm definitely showing my age here, but I actually think some of the most capable operational and strategic hires I've made over the years have actually studied law or been part of a law team.
Yeah.
And I think that they could come in, to your point, Troy, they come in and they have this real capability around seeing things with quite a commercial view as well.
Yeah.
And so I've seen them go into really head of operations and into sales roles and really manage sort of an end-to-end of a sales process with ease.
Yeah.
And I do think actually it would be really interesting to hear what Angela would say now, in terms of her taking that punt and what her thoughts are, because I do think when you've got a whole lot of kids, as for the youth, when they're going through and studying law right now, you don't have to end up, no offence, you don't have to be a lawyer, right? Like, this is the thing about...
You do, as a salesperson, you do spend half your life redlining contracts anyway,
you do,
right?
that's right.
And like the
interesting
thing about fintech in this particular job, it's like, it's not easy to navigate a deal. And like, if you're onboarding someone, if they fit into a certain category, you have to do enhanced due diligence. And I'm doing this right now with a couple of deals that we're onboarding. You go through the process and you can actually really quite quickly move through stuff, because you're very comfortable in that space, the commercial space, to be able to kind of know what questions to ask and know how to frame things to make sure that things are moving and happening. So I think it's a good background, but it's an unusual one.
Yeah, true.
Another country, another role.
Yeah.
Holy shit, what am I doing?
Yeah.
Talk me through like your process of how you had to like grow yourself into sales, because you were in channel initially, weren't you?
Totally.
Part of sales?
Totally. It was like a lot of imposter syndrome, a lot of like working with PE and others, and understanding how they talked and understanding how they thought about things. And I think the biggest thing for me was like putting myself out there and actually leading conversations and getting sort of uncomfortable. I knew that I had it in me, but actually getting out and getting out of that kind of comfort zone and kind of getting your sales hat on, if that kind of makes sense. There's one point that I was thinking about, which I think, there's sort of the difference between Canadians and North Americans and Kiwis. I would say Kiwis and North Americans is that sales piece, which is like going into a room and just totally like not being shy, not being afraid of like putting yourself out there in the face of like what will be probably rejection. 90% of the time someone's going to be like, not interested, see you later. But I think going up to Canada and working with the North Americans, like you really do get used to being pitched to and being sold to the whole time. And learning how to do that as well, learning how to sort of
Well, they do that from a really young age, don't they, almost? And it's something that we've talked about quite often, that we're not really good at it. And you rock up to, I spent time in the US and people were like, oh, hey, and I am amazing. And we're like, oh, are you?
Yeah.
I've never said that about myself before.
Totally.
Like,
what is it about Americans? Because like you put a camera in front of them and they're all perfect.
Yeah.
Like they speak well on camera, they're confident, they've got the bravado. What do you think it is? Is it just the rah, we're the best in the world?
I reckon it is. I think it's just a cultural thing where that's how they've been brought up. I think we've got much more of the English in us. We're sort of like, if someone comes up and introduces themselves and comes across too sort of in your face, like you we're quite judgmental. And I think the more that we can be like, you know what, I'm not actually going to be offended if someone comes up to me and tries to pitch to me. I think that's a good thing.
Yeah.
And
I think everyone should do a sales role.
Yeah.
I think everyone should be on support. You know, in any startup you work in. When I worked at Vend, actually, the first in our onboarding, I'm not sure if they did it when you joined, but like you had to do support for a day, and then you had to sit with the sales team as well.
100%.
Totally.
100%.
I'm a salesperson from it's with my first job, and so I was always like in love with sales. It was just the talking to people, being confident sort of came second nature to me, being an Aussie as well.
Yeah.
But then when I got here to New Zealand, I found exactly that.
Yeah.
Like you walk into a room, and if you're confident and walk into a room, people look at you like, shut the hell up, mate.
Who the hell are you? Exactly.
Yeah.
But if you're a sales guy and you're confident and you're walking into a room and you've got a support person with you, doesn't work. To your point, having the capability to talk about the tech, to confidently talk about what the product is just head and shoulders above everybody else, which I think is important as well.
Yeah, totally.
What advice would you give to people out there at the moment, like for startups and for people thinking about sales? Because this is a question we get asked on the podcast all the time.
Yeah.
When do we hire a salesperson? What should we do?
Yeah, I think it's really, really interesting. I think, and I was at the Fintech Hui recently, and I was having a chat. How do Kiwi tech companies go to market, and particularly how do Fintech companies go to market? Airwallex is quite unusual. We go to market. We've got a big outbound sales team. We've got inbound as well, but primarily like we're an outbound sales team, and that's how we work. We identify prospects, we qualify them, we look at them, we understand what their business is, and then we'll call them. And then we will talk to them and we will try and find that pain point. And it's generally pretty quick that we can find a pain point when it comes to what we do, which is moving money like offshore or back to New Zealand, and what are the fees they're paying, and is it hard, and how long does it take? But we have that conversation and we pick up the phone, and that's how we do it. And I don't think
it's the way it should be.
Yeah,
Right?
it's the way it should be.
It's not being done that way. And that's really interesting because
we spend all our money on marketing, right, trying to bring leads in. And
Totally.
we just like, if most startups I deal with, it would be 90-10, right? So 90%
and
marketing.
it's a pain points.
And you know what? The two other tech companies I've worked for in New Zealand, it's 90-10. It's 90% performance marketing or paid media, and then it's 10% partnerships or outbound. And I've, in those two companies, outbound has always been
Dirty
like,
word.
Yeah, dirty word, near on impossible to do, but like it shouldn't be a dirty word. And actually, if you can,
because it's not sales, and it's like you and I are starting our very first relationship, right? By that phone call, I may have a product that you may need at that time. It may be solving a problem, or I may be just starting a relationship with you that may be for 5 to 10 years until we finally work out that there's something there for you, right?
Yeah,
And so
totally. I think the other thing is like there's only a certain number of people that are looking on Facebook and come across an ad like, Airwallex, like there you go. You know, like there's a huge market out there that we would never be able to speak to if we weren't actually doing what we do in terms of, you know, figuring out how we sell outbound and actually executing on it. So I think, and then the other thing you find is that, you know, if you're putting all your eggs into the inbound like performance marketing bucket, like at some point your competitor will come along and they'll outbid you for your keywords on Google, and then you'll just be in a situation where you've got to pay more and more and more and more and more, and eventually it becomes uneconomic, and you've got to suddenly decide what other channels you're going to sell to and how you're going to do it. It's going to be a huge panic.
That's why I love the new, like Connor, we talked about Connor before, like brand marketing, sales to me. And, you know, like I think you always want to focus on like AdWords and bring marketing in, like getting leads in, but don't let it be like everything. Do you guys do anything for like sales?
Yeah, it's sort of a similar thing. I was actually thinking more about what you were talking about before with that, because I know that Airwallex is quite a values-based company in many ways too. So sometimes it's about that word of mouth, right? So when someone's saying, man, I've just had this awesome chat with Lowry and we're going to onboard this because actually our pain point is moving money from Australia to India, whatever it might be. And they go, oh, I've never heard of them. That's great. Should I give that becomes really important. And I actually think that's a superpower that Kiwis have got. We may not be the Americans giving the whole, hey man, but we've got this incredible superpower where we kind of diffuse situations, we make people really comfortable, we have a conversation. And actually figuring out the pain points is key because you can't just say, hey, figure out what I do, I'm Airwallex. You've got to go and meet them in the middle. I think that's really critical and that's really smart. So a little bit of what we do, we're selling exchange technology and solutions, right? So market infrastructure, no one knows what it is really. unless you work for market operators. But we're trying to figure those out. So am I going to go and replace the New Zealand Stock Exchange trading system right now with what I've got? No.
Yeah.
But I do know that there's some pain points there, and I know the NZX really well. So I got to have a conversation with them and say, look, we're market specialists.
Yeah.
Where are your pain points? What can I do? So that's the stuff that I think Kiwis and Aussies, sorry, Troy, are incredibly good at. And that's going to take Airwallex a long way, right?
Yeah.
I think that's a great approach.
100%. And I had a prospect call me, and I'm working with him at the moment, and he's like, I was just chatting to my mate over in Oz, and he uses Airwallex, and I want to use it too. And that was it.
Yeah.
And that's great because he already understands what it does. He got, and he's relying on a referral from someone that he trusts.
Yeah.
And that's huge. We I'm sure Josh at Tracksuit won't mind me calling him out, but he's the CFO of Tracksuit, and we're doing a lot of work with him. And then he was actually one of the people that I met with in the first couple of weeks, and he taught me a lot of what I know about Airwallex, which is sitting down with him, and he's like, this is how I use it, this is what I do, and these are the cards that I issue, and I put everything on this, and that's how I categorize my spend, and blah blah blah. It was fantastic, and I left that meeting being like, this is amazing. And he was like, do you who else are you talking to around here? Like, we're in his office.
That's right. That's
he was like,
network.
because it was up in Auckland. He was like, because around Vic Park, there's 5 other tech companies that are just around here. You can talk to them and them and them and them and them. And he went off and made intros, and then I had conversations with those folks, and it was like that. It was that.
That is it, right? And that's when I talk to people about create your network outside your network, and it's so important to do that, because I bet you, it's full credit to him, he's actually even at a barbecue having a beer going, oh, hang on, wait, I'll just give Lowry a call, because actually you probably need to hook up with those guys next week. We love the idea of seeing Kiwi companies or people who are working in New Zealand or, being really successful, and I love that.
Yeah.
So I think it's a really interesting piece of our culture and the nature of who we are.
Yeah, totally.
And it's a testament to a good product as well, because
100%.
you're not going to rep a bad product to your mates, and we're all like 2 degrees of separation here in New Zealand, right?
Totally.
So if it's a bad product, it comes back pretty quickly.
You'll find out really
that
quick.
second-hand car.
You're in the cafe tomorrow morning, you're like, oh shit, sorry guys.
Yeah, totally. But I think 2 more things on there. Like, one is financial services. Like, you've got to be trusted. You're dealing with people's money, and you've got to be trusted. And you've got to be a brand that people will happily recommend or endorse. The other thing is social proofing. Social proofing is massive. If we can go out and we can say, hey, these are the companies that are using us. Like, we're working with Aura, we're working with Tracksuit, we're working with a number of these other, partly Rod and Gun, a number of these other New Zealand success stories.
Right.
That is the fastest way that we can gain credibility. We know our product's fantastic, but actually going and just being like, this is who we're working with.
And you're right, because people are going to ask the questions. I don't know in terms of reference checks as such, but where I'm from, right, you've got to be in a situation where you're like, we have got to be really professional in fintech and that. And so that when someone says, it's not a small decision necessarily when you're choosing someone to work with, when you are making payments, you are making these kind of financial decisions. So to know that you've got someone that is trusted and actually you've got that background too, I think that's probably key, isn't it?
Yeah, and a good partnership with Xero, obviously, right?
Partnership with Xero. The Xero brand is a strong one.
Yeah, walk us through that. Tell me about the integration piece, and that must be an important part of your sort of go-to-market strategy, right?
It absolutely is.
Yeah.
Coming from Xero, I remember, I don't know the exact percentage, but the vast majority of Kiwi businesses, Aussie businesses, use Xero. Yeah. Airwallex was built, it was founded in Melbourne. It was built for businesses that use Xero. So our key kind of flex in the ANZ market is our integration with Xero, or we have multiple integrations with Xero and just how powerful they are. So without going into detail, we have to work very, very, very well with Xero to be a product that people are going to use and people are going to buy. It's a baseline for us. So I think it's really important. I think coming back to brand, Xero's obviously a massively trusted brand in this market, and having that close alliance is critical. I think it's really important.
It's true, because people see Xero as, they're like, whoa, they're working with these guys. They're trusted, and I think that's important. And also from an operational flow perspective, it's excellent. Yeah. But equally, it's so good to see that's what, because from when I was looking at it, I was thinking, this is super interesting actually, because you've kind of, everything's lined up good to go. But I was thinking a little bit about the likes of the companies that are out there and listening to the podcast, and in terms of the ones that are working with the bigger banks at the moment, and they've got a few things lined up, how do you then sort of pitch into that? Like, are you asking me to remove BNZ? We're going to come in and replace everything, or do you sort of go in and, as I call it, land and expand? Right?
Yeah. I think it's totally land and expand. I think what we do ultimately, the one of the key pain points that we solve is getting paid from someone overseas. So the thing that I think about with new tech companies or tech companies that are making their first sales is, there was once a time where you had to fly around the world and sit down with bank managers in the countries that you wanted to sell into. Like, isn't that crazy? Like, this is so archaic that you had to sit down, fill out some forms. You often had to have a residential address. So you had to have someone that was living in country.
It was a lengthy, painful process.
Not that long ago. Actually, I would say like most businesses in New Zealand that are selling offshore have done this already and have had to do this. What we're talking about with new businesses, and this is why we work a lot with startups, is like, hey, you don't need to fly around the world. You don't need to fly over to the States and sit down with a bank over there and fill out a form and wait 3 months. You don't need to do that. You set up an account with us and you can create these global accounts in kind of 30 seconds, which means you can get paid by your customer. You can generate a global account, throw it on your Xero invoice and send the Xero invoice out to your customer in the States and get paid into a US account number, but it comes into your US Airwallex wallet. So it's that sort of piece. There are lots of other companies that are really they're not doing what we're doing in financial services, but they're solving similar problems. Like, if you want to incorporate a company over in the States now, you don't need to go over to Delaware or wherever it is and sit down and fill out a paper form and submit it. There are some amazing solutions where you can spin up companies, from New Zealand and have an entity in the US and have an entity in the UK and have an entity in Australia. So all of this, like starting a company, creating a means of getting paid by your customers, creating a company, things like Employment Heroes Remote, where they basically can be the employer of record, so you don't actually need to set up all of the complex compliance and stuff.
That's super important. You must find that from a recruitment perspective. People must be thinking, I'm going to scale my business shortly. I'm opening up an office in Singapore, Mexico, and whatever.
They can't just move on a deal.
Yeah.
It's like it used to be like a 6-month process, right? To be able to get someone hired in the UK or get someone hired in the States. Yeah. And now you can literally spin someone up straight away. And
this is the very
reason why we're wanting to get you on the podcast, right? Because we're trying to show startups now, as New Zealanders, we have to go global from day one.
Yeah.
Totally. It's inevitable that your market isn't going to be here in New Zealand, right?
Totally. And those barriers to entry have never been lower. Like, you can create an account, you can effectively go and hire someone through an employer of record. You can incorporate an entity, and you can do it sort of in half an hour from your desk in Wellington.
It's crazy.
So it's cool, but that's the reason why we talk with a lot of startups. It's like you don't need to necessarily go to your bank even to do this. But coming back to your point, we work alongside banks as well. So there are a lot of businesses out there that use banks, and they're great, and they still obviously have a really key function in New Zealand in terms of transactional relationship. Bringing money into the country is typically really hard and really expensive, and sending money out of the country is typically really hard and really expensive. So that's the piece that we solve for a lot of businesses that then still use their bank for all of the kind of day-to-day transactional stuff that they.
But that's an important piece as Wallex, I guess, is expanding and growing and thinking. It's that product market fit, right? And I'm in a similar situation where you're thinking about how you can work alongside some of the bigger banks or the bigger exchanges, not just try and compete against them.
Yeah, totally.
Right, and I think that's the kind of the change that we need to kind of, I would argue that the bigger exchange providers probably need to register that.
Yeah.
That we're thinking about things that they're never going to think about.
Yeah.
Right, we are solving problems that they cannot be bothered thinking about.
Yeah.
And I think that's the important piece of what you're trying to do as well.
Yeah, 100%.
And I think that's pretty cool, yeah.
Hey, going back to Xero, mate, whenever I get a guest on the podcast, I always ring around a few people and say, hey, talk to me about Larry and what should I ask him? The one thing that people asked me to ask you was, why did he leave Xero and go straight back to Vend or Lightspeed? And so, like, what was it about Lightspeed?
Yeah.
Or I guess, like, you've got a pretty important relationship with Xero, so we probably want to ask, what was it about Xero?
Yeah.
But what was it about Lightspeed that made you go back?
So there was a couple of things. One, there was a fantastic opportunity to lead a channel sales team at Lightspeed, which was really, really exciting. But the main reason I went back was for someone. Was for a person whose name is
left you straight away?
Yeah, that's exactly right. I don't know if you know this.
Yeah, I know.
A guy called Andrew Fraser, and he's like a mentor of mine. He has done some amazing things. Like he was,
he's now the president of Holter.
President of Holter, so he has come in to lead the go-to-market team.
That's awesome.
For Holter. And
he used to go to him and Cos was so close that he used to fly down to and hang out in the Telenami office because that's where Cos used to work out of. He used to fly down to the Telenami office and hang with Cos for a couple of days a year just because they wanted to like hug it out and just work together.
Oh, I love that.
And he's like sweetest dude.
He's awesome. And I describe him as like he's one of the most intelligent people I know, but actually his superpower is empathy. Like
That's
he's
cool.
just one of the most empathetic people. He is he's amazing, and so I went back really to work with him, and he got an amazing opportunity at Holter. So our time together was short. When you cross paths with people in your career where you're like, oh my gosh, you are so good, and I learned so much from you, and like, every meeting that I had, I felt like I came out with something new that I could use, or something that made me a stronger person, or improve the skills or whatever it was. So I feel like Andrew was one of those people.
So if you were in Andrew's position right now and you had a team around you that you were looking to mentor, like what key things would you get them to think about straight away?
One is kind of enthusiasm, excitement, vibe. Like, do they have like something that
they want it?
Yeah, do they want it? And like, are you feeling that through the first Zoom call that you're having?
Totally.
Are you actually feeling that someone's engaged and interested? And then I think the second piece that I love is like that we look at as intellectual curiosity. Does the person they don't need to be a genius, but does a person have curiosity, an authentic kind of curiosity, which means that they will ask questions and they'll figure out what the answers are, and that will make them stronger, and it'll make them learn the product faster, and it'll make them more convincing at selling the product and everything that comes with that. And so I think coming back to your question, those are the two things, and I don't know how you would necessarily train them or teach them, but that's what I look for.
It's kind of a natural aptitude thing, isn't it? In many ways. I think that because with the asking of the questions comes the confidence to ask the questions.
Totally.
And I think that salespeople are quite unique. And I went to a conference, I can't remember, it was maybe a year or so ago, where a guy was really adamant that you had to be quite an extroverted person. And gone are the days where people are sort of, you can be, I think Troy talked about this, you're extroverted introvert or introverted extrovert.
I said I'm a closet introvert.
And I think everyone needs the way to do that. But I think that you're right, the energy and to get excited about something and be naturally curious about it and also want it to grow and succeed is kind of key, really. Yeah. And sometimes, I have worked with some pretty dull products over the years. Trying to get excited about market data. You're like, oh, hello.
But you can feel, I'm recruiting for sales. I spent all morning interviewing salespeople. And so I've been exactly looking for that. And you can feel straight away whether it's forced energy or vibe or real. Like if you just know that like, I could put this person in front of anyone tomorrow and their vibe, and then number two, they're asking the right questions. They know their stuff.
And I actually think a lot of it is down to the product as well. Like I remember at Vend, one of the things I really struggled with is I had never worked in retail. And therefore, like all of the workflows and the kind of things that retailers did, it wasn't first nature to me. It was kind of, I had to learn that. And I found it quite hard to learn the not so much the product, but like the people that we were selling to and the pain points that you would latch on to actually express how good the product was and how we solved those pain points.
That's a really good point, though. You do want somebody who understands the problem they're solving, right?
Yeah, totally. So I don't think
What did you do? Did you go and work in a vape shop?
Vapes.
Vapes were Vend's biggest customers for a long time.
Wow.
Yeah. I should have. Like that would have really helped. And I remember when I was at Vend, one thing that Anna told me about that I remember is she was like, one activity that we did with the strategy team is we had this exercise where we all had to set up a shop. We had inventory, we had our stock, we had our customers, we had our cashier, we had the person behind the counter, we had the person out in the warehouse, and they had to set up a Vend store and they had to work out how to use it, because ultimately by doing that they started to realize what it was that we did and what the problems were that we solved. And I think my longer point here is like, I think some people are just naturally sort of more inclined to be like, I totally get what Airwallex is. Yeah. I totally see this because I've had this trouble before, and I've thought, how can I move how can I can't just give my New Zealand bank account details to this person in the States and expect them to pay me. So you can start to see that they get it and they can relate it to experiences that they've had, but I don't necessarily think that's for everyone. I found it hard at Vend to pick up that.
But I think with sales, when you're hiring salespeople anyway, I've always found that the best situation is as adults to fail fast if it doesn't work.
Yeah.
Right? So there's no point kind of holding on to a situation if it's not working, because you'll know pretty quickly if it's not.
Yeah.
And I've hired incredible salespeople, and then I've had some that just haven't worked out, and I couldn't have told the difference in the recruitment process. I should have.
Yeah. Yeah.
Otherwise
So what do you think that was?
I think it was a genuine curiosity and the genuine passion.
Yeah.
They're just genuinely wanting to sort of not just have one product and just try and sell 20 of them, but to understand also about the purpose, to understand how it's going to evolve.
Yeah.
Getting excited about the evolution of a product because you're selling it.
Yeah, totally.
And it's so exciting.
Yeah.
And so it comes out, right?
Yeah.
And people are going, oh, this is amazing.
Yeah.
And we'll go back to the product team and we'll tell them about it. And all the product team are like, stop it. But there's something quite cool about that. And I think also internally, watching how they work internally.
Yeah.
So that respect between the other, coming back and lobbing something to the product team and saying good luck with that.
Yeah.
And you've got to be live in a couple of weeks. Don't do that.
Yeah.
So there's that element of the values and the respect that I'm looking for as well within the whole process, because we've seen the Lone Rangers, what do they call them, going out there and selling. And gone are the days of those. I really think you've got to be looking at the bigger picture and being part of the team.
Yeah.
So I've
and the best salespeople that interview well are sociopaths, narcissists, like they are, because they're so good because they're sociopaths, right?
Yeah,
and so
totally.
you've got to be really careful when you interview salespeople that if it's too good to be true, it's probably too good to be true.
Is that right?
Totally. Yeah. I think the other thing on the product sales piece is I think if you don't have a passion to learn the product and understand it, you go and sit down in front of, like, we sell to CFOs and financial controllers, like you'll sit down and within a couple of minutes, like they'll know that you don't know your stuff, or they'll know that you don't understand the product, because they'll know the product, or they'll know the pain point, and they'll throw questions at you.
And they'll know why you're there.
Totally.
Right? You can't muck around with that. You can't fake that.
Yeah.
Do you do that before you even go for a job? Like, do you do that throughout the interview process? Like, try and get your head around the product beforehand?
Totally. So we had for every person that we hire at Airwallex, we have a case study, and they effectively have to go and do an account plan or an account analysis on a specific, prospect, and then a pitch plan. So you're actually hearing how someone would look at a prospect, understand what their pain points are, understand what the product is, understand how the product applies to the pain points and solves the pain points. And then the second piece is, and how would you go about getting in touch with this person if we're trying to get in front of you? How would we do that? Like, what would the channels be?
That's smart, because that separates a salesperson in the CV to the salesperson who's genuinely like a salesperson.
Totally.
And I think that I've done it a couple of times as well, and it's a bit controversial. I've given them something to go away, go and do some homework, but I have then subsequently hired some really great people who have genuinely gone away and figured it out.
Yeah.
So I think, because you can, as you say, sociopath, and they'll be like, I'm going to be amazing at this.
Yeah.
Prove it.
Yeah, totally.
If you've got to take the next day to get involved and really understand it, go for it.
Yeah, and a case study is a good little hurdle to sort of weed out the people that are actually committed and really keen. I think the other thing, when I went through the interview process with Airwallex, was I actually saw the product and I was like, oh man, this is awesome. Like, this can do this, and this can do this, and this can solve this. And I sort of started to get that. It gave me a lot more confidence in what I was going to be doing, because I could see how powerful it was. So it was sort of me interviewing them in a way, because I could actually use their product and play around with it and see what it did and what problems it solved, instead of blindly going in and being like, all right, whatever, tell me what it is and I'll go and try and sell it. Like, it's not that sort of that sort of process.
Yeah, I think you can definitely tell when someone's like bought into the product in the interview process.
Yeah.
Hey, you've worked some pretty cool companies, right? So like Vend and Lightspeed and Xero and Airwallex. What do you think? Is there any things that you see in these companies that are like, that's similar, or that's their little secret sauce, or something that just underpins why there's like success?
So you were at Vend. Like Vend had this amazing culture, and
did you read Ben Gracewood's
I
post?
did, yeah, and I thought it was really interesting because I should be careful what I say here, but or maybe I shouldn't. But I came to Vend after the big 2015 kind of restructure.
Context, Ben. Yeah. So Rowan on the podcast last week, I talked about how because I said to Rowan, hey, do you remember that time you fired me? As a joke when we all got laid off at Vend, and it was like, But I remember I said to Rowan, it was a really emotional time for a lot of vendors. Like I was personally pretty happy about it because I was looking to leave anyway, and set up my own little thing. But we went out with a lot of people and it was a like huge fracture in the culture. And then I talked about it on the pod, and then Ben Gracewood posted on LinkedIn today or yesterday or something. Yeah, I think so. Like it was interesting hearing Troy talk about this because it was, but he said when we let go of people, it was it was horrific. It was the worst day of our lives. But after that, we moved faster. We were shipped product faster. People were getting he was like everything just seemed to happen with ease with less people.
Yeah.
And so
And actually, Rowan talks about the fact that scaling is exciting, right? You're part of that journey, but actually, but when you're actually taking people out for the sake of the business, it's incredibly harrowing, and I've had to do it myself as well. It's awful, but you're correct. So these things are done not, you hear people say, look, this is business. And you have to go into these startups with your eyes wide open, right?
Yep.
And I think that's a piece that I would say to most people when they do go in, nothing is set in stone necessarily. Go in there and give it a good crack.
How would you describe the culture at Vend or Lightspeed when you joined?
I could tell I joined in 2018. And I think 2015, end of 2015, start of 2016 might have been the big kind 16, of the big, bump. And I could tell that there was scar tissue, like there was deep scar tissue there.
But it seems to me like Vend turned into more of a performance culture after that.
I think the rubber hit the road, and one of the things I loved about Vend was, it felt like in 3 years we had some ups and downs in those 3 years from 2018 to 2020. 1.5 when we sold to Lightspeed, which was amazing. I think there was a feeling that I remember working very closely with Anna White and Alex and the team, and there was we can make mistakes, but there was a very real sense of what we had to do and how we had to do it, and the fact that we had to do it.
Yeah.
Now,
I wouldn't describe the Vend culture like that when I was there.
Yeah, particularly towards the end before the acquisition, there was a razor sharp focus on what we needed to do and what we just didn't have the people, the resources, the time to do, and that was great. That was the outcome of kind of going through some pretty tough times.
I think Alex Feller will probably say it was his era, right?
What's that?
Alex Feller will say, yeah, that's because that was my era. I took the reins. Great guy. I asked him a question about you too. He was like,
Did you?
He was like, great guy. Yeah.
But I was just thinking about what you said as well, and I haven't read every startup book under the sun, but just through walking the walk, right? And I think that there is an evolution of a company, right? You might start with a great culture and obviously part of what you were involved in, and then sometimes things have to pivot and change really quickly, and it might feel, and I think, New Zealanders, or just generally, we're really great storytellers, and we hold things really closely to our hearts, right? And we do talk about things. But I think the reality is, as you're kind of going through stuff, the next phase for Vend was exactly that, and it was the right move for Vend. And I think you might get a few people that are sort of still on that train at Vend who are like, not like the old days, but I took a company from 6 to 160 down to 80 down to 50, right? It was brutal. And what the company was initially, I knew everyone's names, I knew what they were having for breakfast, see you later, have a nice night tonight, make sure you watch that TV program, to 160 people and you wouldn't even know their names, right? So things evolve and change all the time with culture, and you have to be able to adapt. With that. It doesn't mean it takes away necessarily. I get really frustrated when people say, we've had these values for 18 years. I'm like, stop. Sometimes your values might change. And actually on the back of Vend, maybe having to pivot, maybe their values had to change where, they had to be a bit more focused.
100%. I jumped over to Xero, and Xero went through, I don't know if you remember this, but a couple of years ago, they went through like a very, very large kind of redundancy where it was close to 20% of the workforce that they laid off. And I felt like in those moments, you really get a sense that like the culture is absolutely tested because
you hear
one
the
in
realness.
5 people are going.
Yeah.
And there's so much uncertainty. So I think it's interesting, like what I take from both of those experiences is, and I resonated with what Ben said, because I was like, I feel like you really see the culture when you go through the tough.
So
like
true.
the really tough downs, the really hard times.
I agree. How would you describe Airwallex culture?
I've been there for 8 weeks, so
Right.
and so
Everything's awesome.
everything's awesome, and I'm coming in, and I'm the first person in New Zealand. So like I think for
lonely.
Lonely. I think the exciting thing is I've got a chance to build the culture in New Zealand. We're going to have a team of 10. I was saying, I'm still really getting to know the company in Oz. Like the sales team is phenomenal, phenomenal. And I'm just like, I actually feel really honored and like a little bit kind of a little bit nervous joining because of the caliber of people. So I think they've got a super strong team.
Did you
Larry,
have to get
they
permission?
should be worried. They should be feeling like that. Because actually, the question that I've got is what sort of voice do you have in New Zealand when you're thinking about some of the evolution of the product, right? So have you, I'm assuming they've hired you because of your background and your capability.
Yeah.
Are you thinking, how do you feed back into that product loop?
Totally.
Instead of, because that's exciting as you bring on more people, right?
It is. And I'm already starting to do that. So we start to see, like I've seen in New Zealand, we've got a particular gap in the market with cards and spend, which we're really proud of.
We do. Yeah.
Where it's kind of like, I've got a team of 50 people, they're all spending on cards, and like their receipts, what's happening with your receipts? I've got my finance team spending 8 hours a month trying to capture receipts because the sales team have gone and
Adrien's lost her receipts. She's like,
all the receipts are lost, they're gone. Like
There you
salespeople aren't great at keeping
Yeah.
receipts, and being able to have those. This is slightly dull, but like have those receipts kind of go and reconcile automatically back into the Airwallex expense management product. So what I've seen in New Zealand is we do not have what the rest of the world has here. So we're talking with teams that aren't necessarily, or companies that aren't necessarily global, but are big New Zealand companies that are like, we've got 200 people that need cards, and our team is spending way too much time at the end of each month trying to figure out who's, which receipts go where, and do the kind of end of month stuff that they've got to do. And we want to have something that is modern and that does that. In Australia and the States and the UK, like we're one of a couple of different solutions that are all amazing. But in New Zealand, there's just not that.
It is such a pain point, and I couldn't agree with you more.
Totally.
Isn't it mad that we, like, when New Zealand kind of like pioneered fintech into a degree, and
We were
FPOS and all these
FPOS.
things, and now I feel like just gone back 100 years.
It's that feedback loop, which is kind of taking that back, and not only to product, but to marketing, and saying, hey, like in New Zealand, this is a really unique value proposition, which isn't necessarily as unique or as unusual in Australia or the States, but actually in New Zealand, we're kind of out there by ourselves. So like, let's figure out how we can
That's
refine
really
our
exciting.
marketing.
That's really
and
exciting for you, because I do think New Zealand is a really good test bed, right? Like I think that you can fail fast here, and you can kind of figure it out really quickly. And I think your team will learn a lot from that.
Yeah.
Well, the team in Australia will learn a lot from the
Yeah.
Australians going to learn a lot from the New Zealanders, Troy. Just to let you know that.
I mean, it's cool for me just to see Aussie companies treating New Zealand, like seriously for a start, saying, hey, like we're committed to moving into New Zealand, we're committed to hiring teams in New Zealand. It's cool for companies like getting behind the startup ecosystem here, supporting us. I think, giving our companies the ability to, like, as a recruiter, I have to send invoices and, all around the world, right?
Yeah.
And so for me, when I've got big, huge companies saying, can you do business with us over in the US? And I go, I'll figure it out later. Well, I'll do it. And then having to go, oh my God, how am I going to do this? To spin it up straight away. It's just so good. And so what do you see the future for Airwallex? Like, are you going to be like a complete bank in the future?
We're not a bank. I don't necessarily know, but I think what we're doing is
Did they ever get their coffee cups?
I think actually I should go back and ask. I'll go back and ask. I'll come back to you. I don't know. I think all businesses that are doing some form of export or import are gonna use something like us. Like I would prefer that to be in the next year or two. I think it'll take a little bit longer than that, but I think that's where we're going. So I think banking is going to change, where I still certainly see that the national banks or the domestic banks are going to have a place, but I think globally, I think there's going to be a higher adoption of these sorts of products.
Are you incorporating tariffs into your?
I've talked to a lot of customers that are going through this process. I'm thinking of one in my head, and they're actually getting their product made in China, and they're shipping it straight to the States, and they're selling it on Shopify, and they're taking payment in USD. That money's moving back to NZD. So like you kind of, and then I was talking to them and I was like, but why do tariffs apply? We're in New Zealand. They're like, no, it's coming straight from China.
Right.
So anything that's going on a ship from China to the States, my simple understanding is that like there are going to be tariffs that they have to think about. But you uncover all of these amazing like New Zealand businesses they're actually sort of like two people, and they've just uncovered this awesome product and this amazing market out there, and through tools like Shopify and Airwallex and others, they've just got this global business.
It's fascinating. It's great.
With two people kind of running it, and you don't need much more than that. So I think that's where, and I hope that's where we'll get to in New Zealand, where we're not necessarily restricted by our geography, and we're not necessarily reliant on just shipping physical things offshore, and we can do amazing things like get products crafted in China or wherever it is, and get them shipped around the world without them even having to come through New Zealand.
Yeah,
I think it's amazing, and companies now can stand up here in New Zealand, use AI to like not have to hire 1,000 people to like
totally
use products like Airwallex so that they can get payments easy and sort things out, and like bolt on with you guys, and like use an employer to hire someone in the country. And so it's a pretty cool day for Kiwi startups. They don't realize like us older people, I'm talking about myself here and not you guys, had to grind out the hard way. And I kind of missed the whole jump on a plane a little bit. I'm not gonna lie, but not that much.
I don't.
Yeah.
What do you think the attitude is to these types of businesses in New Zealand, though? Like, are people opening their doors? We've talked a little bit before about people being a great network for you, but people are like, it's a great idea, but I still want to stay with my bank. I still want to do stuff. Like, that's the part where we want people to understand that this is where I guess your brand piece comes in, but where the risk comes in. What do you?
Absolutely, and this is a challenge for us. And like I look at different industries, and they have different approaches to adopting tech. So you look at like SaaS and tech companies generally in New Zealand, and they're our ideal customer profile because they are generally very progressive. They're open to new solutions. They'll adopt things. They'll try it. If it works, they'll keep it. If it doesn't, they'll ditch it. Like they're very, very not necessarily easy to sell to, but they're great in terms of like taking a punt on something new and giving it a go. Retail e-commerce is another big segment that we've got, and they're similar. They use Shopify to sell. They use Lightspeed to sell. They use, they use different payment methods. They've got to, throw on Afterpay and Klarna and make sure that they're offering new ways to pay, and they just have to do that to be successful in retail e-com. So when we talk to them, it's quite an easy conversation because they have to use new technology to run their business. I think we're gonna come up against challenges with the more conservative, like established industries in New Zealand. So like, travel and tourism, dairy, meat, wood exports, those types of industries that have had a relationship manager at the bank for 40 years who's been stopping by every quarter to say hi. We're going in there and talking about what we're doing. So I think we need to figure out, and this is kind of part of the challenge, but part of the excitement as well, how we go in there and actually, I think to your point earlier, like work alongside the bank. We're not saying like ditch your bank, but hey, like we can help you move this money faster, cheaper, easier, and deposit into BNZ or ASB.
Sometimes that customer profile piece too. We can take the ones that are costing you a little bit more money and that you're not really interested in.
Yeah.
We can help you there.
Yeah.
And I think that's the piece too that is really important.
Yeah.
You kind of know where you fit.
Yep.
Yeah.
Have you ever known a bank to say we're not interested in that money?
Hey, listen, I'm just sort of talking a little bit about how Lowry can get himself into the new banks. NZ, call us.
How would you get into some of those more established?
How would I?
Yeah, like how would you, like whether it's our product or whether it's anyone's, like how do you go and target Halter's doing it at the moment, where they're selling like amazing technology into quite an old school industry, old school vertical, which is farming. Like,
this is back to the Kiwi thing. Maybe I'm being really naive and a bit old school.
I think they did it well. Is that they, like Craig went to like a farmer friend of his, right, and said, "Hey, we're just going to do it for you for free and show you and test and learn." And then advocates became so huge for him. Like farmers talking to farmers is how you sell that product, right? And so I think the same again. Like if you talk about the dairy industry or whatever it may be, right? Because the dairy industry sells a lot of product, overseas and a lot of money moving around. I think if you can crack one customer segment, they'll sell it.
And his story wouldn't necessarily fly if you're not told, but people will be like, wait, what? Like his benchmark at one point on that farm is if he drove up the driveway and the kids were excited to see him, and the kids from then they were doing well for themselves. And I just was like, that is so genius. Because the mum wasn't going, get these guys off the farm, they're annoying me. Like they just were really a great bunch of guys, right? Who were just wanting to solve a problem. And this, I mean, he clearly had a lot of patience and full credit to them. I do think, look, I am a bit old school when it comes to the relationship building, right? And that's something which is going to be really important because you're not trying to be something you're not.
Totally.
You are what you are. And actually, sometimes it's about saying, listen, I'm not competing with you, but I can work alongside you. Can we have a conversation? Right? Because these are the credible people that are working with us. Let's go for it. And I think that's important. I mean, when I was at NZX, ASX were doing something. Everyone's like, you can't speak to them, can't speak to the straight. Don't speak to ASX. And I was like, rang up the ASX and I found somebody who did the same thing as me and was like, can you send me something? And I went and had a coffee with them and I made friends with them. And then, why? Because actually your competition and they will teach you the most.
Totally.
Right? And they will make you better and stronger for it. And I wouldn't have done half the things I did at the stock exchange at that point without reaching out to competition and aligning myself and knowing where I sort of sat in the ecosystem. So I don't know. I think that genuine approach to sales is really critical.
Totally. Yeah. I totally agree. I think getting out there and actually being in the community, like one of the big
they're not online as much, right? They're not, those exactly. Buyers aren't online, so you got to be in the community, right?
Yeah, exactly. You have to be in the community. And they have, like, if I'm not wrong, like I've seen they advertise and they've got people in all over New Zealand. Like they've got their BD folks all around the country. They're locals. One of the things we have to do is really get into the various communities within New Zealand that we're selling into and meet people and kind of talk to them and get them to...
People love innovation. Whether they like it or not, they do. When I remember 10 years ago setting up a Monzo account, 3 days after having a baby, because I had to talk into my phone and take a photo, and I was like, this is, I mean, I am not in a great place right now, but I am setting up a Monzo account. Like, it just blew my mind, right? Like, and I think people want to know that things are moving forward, and I think Kiwis are up for that. There's no disrespect to your, to the, as we say, the banks that are around, because there'll always be a place for them. But it's making space and room for the others, like yourselves, which I think is exciting.
Totally.
And it's changing so fast. We talked about Xero before, right? Being like a big part of your, your growth. Like I remember 2006 or 2008 or whatever it was, when like most people were like, I'd never put my financial my financial information in the cloud. That's crazy, right? So it changes so fast.
Oh, absolutely. I remember, I was going to say this earlier, but one thing that's always stuck with me is someone telling me at Xero, like the strategy when they started was borrow bigger brands, and that's how they built their brand credibility, which was they partnered with the banks in New Zealand and Australia, and the banks were the big brands. And they did this sort of partnership strategy where they put their logo next to the bank because they had a bank feed in with ASB or CBA or whoever it was. And they talked a lot about borrowing bigger brands, and it's really simple, but it's kind of true. Like if we can go into the New Zealand market, and it's all absolutely true stuff. We look at Xero as a great brand in ANZ, and to the extent that we can develop that brand in New Zealand for us by having them next to us and having amazing companies that we work with, that's awesome. That's what we need to do.
Hey mate, we've got time for one last question, and I think this question sort of came from a few people that said, hey, lots of startups out there at the moment. We're in that stage where like recession breeds new startups, right? Like people lose their jobs over the last couple of years and they go, bugger it, I'm just going to do something, right? And so we're starting to see some of these startups push out now and have to get their product out into the marketplace a little bit more. And so the channel sales, the partner sales to me has always been something that I keep telling people, like, get people to sell your product for you, right? Like you should be talking about this earlier. You should be doing this earlier. And so in a nutshell, like what would you say to someone who's out there considering like taking on some partners?
I would say figure out what your channel is. Like and I think depending on what you sell, there might be some really good fit channels and there might not be. If you look at Xero, like look at their accountants, like I still think Xero is the most amazing example of channel sales. Like, most of like 60, 70% of the way that Xero is distributed is through partnerships, through channel partners, which are accountants. So they've cracked it. I love Tracksuit as an example. Like their channel partners are marketing agencies, and there's a really beautiful, like, sort of, to use a cringe word, like synergy there, where they sell to marketing agencies, and marketing agencies then are there also their partners. So like Xero, like an accountant uses Xero plus the end user uses Xero. Tracksuit, the marketing agency or the agency uses Tracksuit plus the end user uses Tracksuit. So I think anyone where you've got a channel partner who also uses your product becomes like this super powerful kind of distribution play for you. One of the things, candidly, that I've really struggled with channel partners at Lightspeed in particular was like you go and talk to them and you say, this is what we do and this is how product works, and they're like, yeah, this is awesome, this is awesome, this is awesome. And then you kick off the partnership and you're like, so how the conversation's going? And they're like, oh, and actually it's it's quite hard to retain a lot of that information when they're going and talking about their own product to be like, oh, and let me tell you about this product over here, which is also sort of works nicely with us. It's quite difficult. So you need to the amazing thing about Xero with accountants and Tracksuit with agencies is like they're so good at selling it because they use it and they use it for themselves.
It's a tricky one. I mean, Serge talks about this. Serge is the previous host on the show. He talks about is it a characteristic approach with channel partnerships, and it's interesting too because you do think about whether or not they are going to be going and thinking about you first, and can they context switch? Yeah. And I think you have to be really, really precise about how you approach that.
And how you train your partners, right? Like, how do you give them the training to make sure that they've got the product knowledge?
Totally.
And is it incentifying them, or is it saying, if you don't do it, you're out? And we see it all the time where people are like, we've got a new strategic partnership with XYZ, and then nothing happens.
Totally.
Right? And you don't want to be that because
that's the Vend Apple partnership.
I remember, I remember someone telling me they're like 19 out of 20 partnerships will totally fail. If you've got a product that can be used by your distribution network and your end customer, like amazing. Or if you can build, Xero, the practice management, like the accounting practice management tools that Xero has built, kind of makes it perfect for a distribution model through their accounting platform. So, but that's quite rare. That's quite unusual. I think at Lightspeed we had our best distribution partners were those that built a business off the back of us. So we had a company, there's still a fantastic partner of Lightspeed's over in Sydney called Tech Pantry. They win business because they sell the Lightspeed product and then they go and implement it. So their commercial, the reason for them being wasn't just hey, here's 10% rev share. It was like, no, actually, I'm going to come in, I'm going to help you get set up with Lightspeed, but that's going to require me coming in and doing all this physical, plugging in the printers and getting set up and getting everything talking to each other, and I'm going to charge you for that. So they had a business that was built on top of ours, and that's where that worked really well. And so the commercials were more than just a rev share. It was like actually, like they could upsell, they could do a value added piece of something there along with our software that meant that they could distribute that. And that's kind of the old school distribution model with value added resellers.
And really simply, right, if your partners can't make money, what are they? They're not going to sell you.
Totally. We overcook commercials and we think that revenue share is really important. And actually, in all honesty, like it's interesting when you're sitting down and reading the contract, but then you put it in a drawer and go away, and if the leads aren't coming through, it's a problem.
Hey mate, well that's all we've got time for. So thank you so much for coming down to Wellington, talking about your story, talking about Airwallex, Adrien. It's been fun having you on the first podcast.
Last.
Serge is currently off getting calf implants because he wore shorts last week on the podcast and had some pretty brutal feedback, I'm not going to lie. Yeah, so he'll be back, I think, next week, and I think we might have both of you on the podcast. But mate, if people want to go and look into your product now, like we have lots of people from the tourism, dairy, industry that are like traditionally not online. Yeah, we don't. But if they want to check out your product, what should they do?
Airwallex.com. You'll go to the New Zealand page. You'll see our New Zealand logos. We've got some awesome customers there that we've put up on the page. Hit me up on LinkedIn, whatever. If someone wants to reach out, I'll give them a call and
so you're wearing all the hats right now.
Wearing all the hats.
I love it.
All the hats, and we're sort of trying to get across all the channels and take as much opportunity as we can.
Awesome, Bulla. Hey, thanks so much for joining us, man.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Okay, well that was interesting, right? Like this is what I love about these podcasts is you've got people that come in and have these conversations with you and you're like, I'm now A, want to work for them, B, want to be them, C, want to sell for them. Like I think this is really incredible and it's a really good story, and I think this is a really good example of someone like Lowry who's had this really interesting career journey, which is,
have you ever sat there on a couch with a lawyer who could speak so perfectly about sales, product, and was a salesperson, right? I'm questioning if he even was a lawyer.
Oh my God, he's probably lied to us.
Yeah,
he probably wasn't a lawyer
because he didn't ask. We didn't make us sign anything before the podcast.
No NDAs.
So we can use him however we like.
Okay, just do a little search on LinkedIn and just do a little background search beforehand. Policeman's daughter, trust me. If he's bad,
we probably should
we'll
get
a
form saying, can we use your assets online?
No, but I think that the cool thing is that they have, if I was a bunch of people sitting in Melbourne right now, they have, you've got a guy who is, our last point with him, is wearing all the hats right now. And I think he's going to go away and he's thinking about all the types of people he needs to set up the culture that he needs to support the product and the global expansion and all the things that are great. And that is really exciting, not just for him, but for all the people that are going to be joining his team. And that is going to be really exciting for him, which 100%. I love.
And for me, I'm really passionate about products that truly care about startups.
Yeah, totally.
Like we have Vanta as our sponsor. They give a shit about startups.
Yeah.
Airwallex has been great in the community.
Yeah.
They have a great community manager that's always out here and talking, and she's done some great work. But I think, it's definitely a cool product, and it solves a pretty pertinent problem, right? And so especially from New Zealand, when this small little country on the other side of the world trying to do business globally, to be able to just instantly turn on that tap, it's just so good.
And I love when he talks about, this is what I just love about Kiwis, how he's got that support behind him, right? And I know now when I'm chatting away to somebody, I'm going to be thinking, Airwallex, you need to talk to them, right? Or I've already got my CFO having a think about it, right? I think that's the cool part of being part of this community and having him come on and talk to you, and also have the opportunity for us to also think of other people that he can meet. That's great. He gets an opportunity to talk. 8 weeks in. I was quite surprised.
8 weeks in. Should I come on a podcast and talk about the company that I've just joined? Shit, yeah. Let's get into it.
That's a female founder point. If you're 8 weeks in, you're like, I don't even know if I can spell my name. I think, sometimes this is it. This is where the imposter syndrome, and he touched on that. I love that Lowry touched on imposter syndrome because it's not just a female thing. And that's what I get too. I don't know. God, I've never done a podcast before. I'm really worried about how I'd actually articulate what I do. Oh my God, I spend my whole life in the circle of imposter syndrome. It's just part of it, and you have to dial it down.
As do I. As does everyone. Yeah. You just get better at living outside of your comfort zone. Yeah. Well, if some people get better at living outside their comfort zone, right? Honestly, fantastic to have you on, Adrien.
I am only one floor down from here, Troy. I appreciate this was potentially a location and a decision, but I really enjoyed it.
I think we're going to leave it to the audience to decide. Survivor, who should we vote off
Adrien? Who will it be?
Jono Island. Yeah. And special shout out to Jono with our new studio here.
Yeah,
Jono
awesome,
Empire
Jono.
Films. Jono Empire Films has set up this amazing studio and sorted this out. He was paying for things out of his own pocket and screwing things up on the walls. And so thank you so much. If you are looking for a podcast studio, if you're looking for somewhere to film or someone to do video production and editing, check out Empire Films below because he's a great man. So Adrien, I think we've got a pretty big guest lined up for the next episode that you and Serge are coming back on for, hopefully. And so, yeah, I can't wait to have this conversation again.
Excellent. Thanks.
See you next time.